Bostrom Ministries. Beginning January 2018, Bostrom Ministries engaged in a whole new assignment by entering the airwaves of the world. Don't miss Ken and Mary Bostrom Ministries live.
Welcome back to United in His Purpose broadcast. Ken and I have the mandate to reach a lost, teach a found, and preach a word that we would all become united in His purpose. You know, in these last days, we need to be as one. We need to be united, and don't neglect to come together, because there is a corporate anointing when you come together. So don't just sit in front of your television. Get in church. Get with a prayer group. Get with a Bible study group. And just increase the anointing to break every yoke and destroy every burden in these last days. You know, I've been teaching on Kings of the Divided Kingdom. Today I'm going to be recording the last 3 shows. We've already had 12 episodes of Kings of the United Kingdom, and it has been intense study. Actually, I have been a Bible college teacher, and this is actually Bible college material, because a lot of people in the church, this is just kind of goes right over their head. They just think that kings are David and Solomon and, you know, a few others that they might think, but, you know, every single one of them has a purpose. And so we're going to get into it. You know, I taught a series one time, a long time ago, on the 12 tribes. You know, there's 12 sons of Jacob, who is later called Israel. And he started the 12 tribes. And I came on to something this week as I was studying for the month of Sivan. Zebulun is the tribe for the month of Sivan. And this is what I found. Zebulun was the 6th and last son of Leah. The Lost Books reads, he said to the divided kingdom, it reads, he said to the divided kingdom, for I have learnt in the writing of my fathers that you shall be divided in Israel, and you shall follow 2 kings, and you shall work every abomination. Now, isn't that amazing? Because all of the 12 sons died in Egypt. Remember when Joseph went to Egypt, and then all the other brothers came, and they were in captivity for all those years, and they came out with the Exodus. Every single one of those original 12 sons died in Egypt, and all of them have what they gave on their deathbed to their sons, just like Jacob did to his 12 sons. He gave them a prophetic word, and this is what Zebulun said. Now, Zebulun was very prophetic. He was known as the businessman of all of them, but this is what he wrote. Now, the tribes, the kingdoms were not divided for many years after that. Because if you look at the book of Exodus, and then you go to the book of Samuel, there's a lot of time between Exodus and Samuel. And so all of this was written, and it was carried down from generation to generation. They carried it down, and they must have wrote it down somehow. But it was all put into a book in 137 BC, before Christ. And so I thought that was interesting, how he prophetically saw that the nation was going to be divided, that there was going to be 2 kings, and and all of them will be working abominations. Those are some things that God would not allow. And so here we have the 2 kingdoms. I just have a little overview here of the 2 kingdoms. The northern 10 tribes were called Israel. The southern 2 tribes were called Judah. So the northern kings, both of the nations were divided in 925. Saul had 40 years to be as king. David had 40 years as king. Solomon had 40 years as king. So the first united kingdom was 120 years old. But when they divided, that was in 925 BC. And Israel was conquered those 10 tribes were conquered in 722. That means that they owned that nation, those 10 tribes of the kingdom of Israel, only lasted 203 years. Now, they had 19 kings. Every single one of them were bad kings. Not one of them did right in God's sight. But Ahab was the worst, and he started a dynasty that was horrible. And then when we come down to Judah, there was 2 tribes in Judah. It also started in 925, but it wasn't conquered until 586 BC. So they actually lived 36 years longer than Israel. And why is that? Because they actually had 8 good kings. They had 19 kings and one which her name was Athaliah. She was a very evil queen. And so they had 8 good kings. So 8 good kings actually caused them to prosper 136 years more than the nation that had all bad kings. Now what I really want you to see in this entire series of Kings of the Divided Kingdom is how important leadership is. We're seeing on a national level how important a president and his administration is. We're seeing on every single state level that how important it is for the governor and lieutenant governor, or your senators, your congressmen, leaders, how important it is to have good leaders, because the nation will suffer or prosper according to the leader that is in charge. That is the one thing I want you to know about this whole thing. So where we were last time, we left off with Hosea, which actually is Hoshea, who is actually the last king of Israel. He was the 19th of all the evil kings. So let's take a look at Hoshea. He was the 19th king. And 2 Kings 17:1 says, during the 12th year of Ahaz, Judah's king, Hoshea, Elah's son, inherited Israel's throne in Samaria. Samaria was the capital of the northern 10 tribes. His reign lasted 9 years. Verse 5, Assyria's king then invaded Israel and besieged Samaria for 3 years. Verse 6, during Hoshea's 9th year, Assyria's king captured Samaria and carried off the Israelites to exile in Assyria. Now, there was warnings that God, if you totally disregarded God and left him totally out of your life, these would be the warnings that the nation would be scattered. And that's found in Deuteronomy 4:27, 28:64, and 32:26. 3 different warnings to leaders that if they do not follow God, that their nation could be scattered. Do you know that was in 722 BC that this nation of Israel, the kingdom of Israel, was scattered? They're called, for all those times, they were called the 10 lost tribes. The 10 lost tribes. So let's look at that. From 722, they were scattered throughout the entire world. They're found now in South America. They're found in Canada, Northern America. They're found all over Europe and Asia, as Africa, South Africa, Australia. Every single nation has got some of the 10 lost tribes. And guess what? God didn't lose them. He knew exactly where they were. They just did not have a home, and they were scattered into places that really was not their heritage. And in 1948, look at 722 BC to 1948, they did not have a home. And in 1948, the Spirit of the Lord started calling them, and all of a sudden people started migrating from every single part of the world. No longer were they the 10 lost tribes. Now they had a home. They were no longer lost. They were no longer homeless. Now they had a home, and they had the promises of God back to them. So that was Hoshea. That was the last king, and there would be not another kingdom of Israel like that again. the 10 lost tribes. There were some people that ended up living there that the king actually left as vassals, but it wasn't good. Now here's one of my very, very, very favorite kings, Judah's king, Hezekiah. Hezekiah was the 13th king, and 2 Kings 18:1 says, during the 3rd year of Hoshea, remember we're just talking about Hoshea, Elah's son and the last king of Israel, Hezekiah, Ahaz's son, inherited the throne in Judah. Now Ahaz, if you remember on the last episode that we had, and that would be episode number, it was part 12 of the Kings of the Divided Kingdom, Ahaz was horrible. You know, Hezekiah, I was reading a book, a historical novel, and it started off with Hezekiah, you know, the nation that invaded the northern 10 tribes was coming after them too. And so he was so afraid that he started doing everything. He started sacrificing his son. And Hezekiah almost was one of those sons that was thrown into the fire as a sacrifice, so that God, they were thinking that would stop them from being attacked, from being taken over by that other nation. And not so. And so Hezekiah is the most written of any king of all of the 38 kings of Israel. It was the most written. 2 Kings chapters 18, 19, and 20. That 10 is supposed to be 20. My error. 2 Chronicles 29, 30, 31, and 32 all have to do with Hezekiah. Large sections of Isaiah. And he was 25 when he became king, and he reigned 29 years. 2 Kings 18:5 says, Hezekiah put his trust in the Eternal One, Israel's God. Before and after his righteous reign, no other king ever compared to him in Judah. Now, the references I'm using from the Voice translation. It's what I've chosen to use for this. I like how the Voice translation reads about the kings. I like it most of all of them. So we're going to continue here on king. Now remember, Judah only had 8 good kings, and Hezekiah was one of them. The other ones were Asa, Jehoshaphat, Joash, Amaziah, Uzziah, Jotham, Hezekiah, and Josiah. You're going to love Josiah. And the first thing he did was to destroy all the wicked worship and repair the temple. You can imagine, after he had seen his brothers thrown into the fire, sacrifice children, you know, children like 6 years old, pick them up and throw them into the fire and watch them burn and listen to them scream. That's what the images that Hezekiah had. That's a remembrance. The first thing he did, he started tearing down those child sacrifice places, just like we want to tear down the abortion clinics. Killing babies is still wrong. And, you know, in 2 Chronicles 31, he did another thing. None of the other kings, remember in Leviticus, God said that they were supposed to celebrate the Passover and the 7 feasts every year. Guess what? When it came to the kings, Hezekiah was the first one to celebrate Passover, and it wasn't even on the right date. It was on the 2nd month instead of the 1st month. Why? Because they weren't ready. But there was a place in the Bible that says that if you were not ready for the first Passover, that you could do the second Passover. So he did the second best thing. He did the Passover, and he even sent people up to the northern kingdom to see if there was any stragglers, any farmers or something that had been left behind that weren't taken captive by the Assyrian king. And they invited them down to Jerusalem for Passover. Can you imagine what it would have been like in that war-torn country where their families were taken from them, their neighbors, everything had been stolen, their livestock had been stolen, their farms had been burned, and all of a sudden somebody comes from Jerusalem and says, we want to invite you to Passover. Can you imagine what it was like? They had God taken, removed out of their lives for 203 years. And all of a sudden, God was coming and inviting them. And a lot of them moved down to Jerusalem in that period. In 2 Chronicles 31, Passover was celebrated during his reign, but in the second month of Iyar instead of the first month of Nisan, because the people were not ready. What King Hezekiah did is he restored faith to God in the people. Now, there was one thing I want to tell you about, and this is probably the thing I've taught about most of anything that I've ever done, and that's eagles. If you went to visit my husband in my house, we have eagle in our front yard, we have eagles in our backyard, we have eagles in almost every single room in our house. We love eagles. There's just something about eagles. And eagles are, I'm going to take from a couple different teachings I've had. I've got understanding the eagles in the last days is a key to these last days, understanding eagles. I wrote a book in 2004, Those that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. So I was teaching how God had taught me how to renew my strength. And then there's a book called The Final Quest by Rick Joyner. Highly recommend it. When we were at Living Stones, we heard Cole Stringer from Australia teach on eagles, and we bought the book. Current Teaching on Eagles by Mac Hammond was excellent. I taught this in Ohio, and Dr. Tim Sheets of Ohio had a prophetic word on June 10th of 2013. There's so much about these last days, that understanding the eagles. And in my notes here, I have some things about the King Sennacherib. But let's go look here into my notes on the screen. 2 Chronicles 32 tells us a battle between Assyrian king Sennacherib, who had taken every nation in all of Judah except the city of Jerusalem. Hezekiah's reign was from 728 to 686 BC. Near this time frame, Sargon II mentions Hezekiah in his inscription. Hezekiah diligently prepared his nation for the worst. A major water tunnel of more than 1,500 feet was dug to supply the city of Jerusalem in case of siege. And let's look here at this tunnel. In this tunnel here, you can see it's kind of a S kind of shape here, and that's what it looks if you look at it from the top. And if you're looking at it from the bottom, he had over here, probably would be better if I would draw it for you. Over here, can you see that? This is Gihon Springs. Now, Gihon Springs was their water source for all of Jerusalem. And so if the enemy would attack that Gihon Springs, Hezekiah loved God. He was worshiping God all the time. And if he would have been worshiping God one night, and then all of a sudden he thought, because at this time Israel had been taken over, and King Sennacherib had been taking over much property all around him, he must have thought, we need to do something about those springs. And so he thought, if those springs are captured, we'll just die of thirst. They would actually die of thirst, because that was their water source. So what he did is he drew that tunnel. Now this tunnel looks like, it's just straight across. But when you see it from the top, it looks like an S. What they did is they had diggers that started digging on each end, and then they were going to meet each other, and they would run into different kinds of rock formation that they couldn't, so they would have to kind of snake around. And it was absolute miracle upon miracle upon miracle. This tunnel is 1,750 feet below ground. It's a tunnel carved into the mountain in the reign of King Hezekiah. And here, the location where they met. This inscription actually is in that tunnel. You can go visit it today. When the tunnel was driven through, and there was a way in which to cut through, while were still axes, each man towards his fellow, and while there were still 3 cubits to be cut through, there was heard a voice of a man calling to his fellows, and there an overlap in the rock on the right and to the left. When the tunnel was driven through, the quarrymen hewed the rock, each man towards his fellow, axe upon axe, and water flowed from the spring towards a reservoir for 1,200 cubits. The height of the rock above the heads of every quarryman was 100 cubits. And so they had to go by faith. They had to go by faith that they were going to, they didn't know if one was higher than the other, one was, 100 feet away. They had no idea. They were going by faith, trying to meet each other. And miracle upon miracles, they met each other. And that's one thing that Hezekiah is most known for. But I want to talk to you about the war that Israel had. Now, the Sennacherib, the Syrians, were absolute vicious. They were extra vicious. In fact, I think it was like in 1500, in Nineveh, they uncovered his castle, which was 2 miles long. And inside, he had all the engravings all over the walls, the paintings all over the walls of all of his feasts. And Hitler and Stalin actually learned from Assyrians' terror tactics. They learned how to terrorize the people. Number one, they put thousands and thousands on impaling poles. They put poles up, probably looked like a matchstick, but it was huge. They take a tree trunk, and then they make a point on the top, and then they would put the person on there alive, and sometimes it would take them days for them to die up on that. And it said, the dead turned black, and it looked like a black forest because there was thousands and thousands of impaling poles. They flayed thousands, skins hanging on trees and buildings to cause fear. They took 2,000 men and 2,000 women back to Syria to be slaved. The women, they removed the left ear, the tip of their nose, and their left hand and left big toe. Isn't that amazing? The men, they removed the bottom lips, no bottom lip, the right big toe, and the right ear. They were disfigured to become slaves. 30 years later, they were loosed and went back to Samaria, and they were called half-breeds, Samaritans. And so what they would do, King Sennacherib had media of terror. And so the media would come. Jerusalem was the entire last city in all of the Middle East over there for Sennacherib to conquer. And he would have his men that would call up over there were media terrorists is what they were. And they would call and they would give the real news of terror across. Lachish is taken. We have taken Bethlehem. And they started naming names. And they would put the leaders of those cities on impaling poles all around Jerusalem. If you can imagine the terror that was all around Jerusalem as they were terrorizing the people. Now there was 3 different kinds of Assyrian weapons. Some of them were brand new, they'd never been used. Number 1, war eagles. War eagles, and I'm going to read to you from my notes. The Assyrian had raised and trained 7,000 Himalayan eagles, golden eagles. They brought 700 trained war eagles with them to Judah. Some of the largest birds in the world, the wingspan was 8 to 9 feet. Eagles were very strong, and the soldiers would grab a leg and a hand in each to run, and they were trained to leap up. They would grab one of the legs of the eagle, and then they would jump, and the eagle would pull them up so they could see over the top of the wall. And the eagles, when they were flying, they would have something, metal attached to their legs. And I had seen one place where I think it is known that over 2,000 people in Jerusalem's walls were beheaded by these eagles, by these war eagles just swooping down. This is where the phrase came from, scared of your own shadow. Because when they would come out, if they would see a shadow, they would start running because they would think it was an eagle was going to soar at them. Those eagles would swoop down at 60 miles an hour, and it was too late by the time they saw them. And they would pick up children, they would pick up animals, and it was amazing. And then Isaiah would totally always prophesy about these weapons. God's answer to that is, have you not heard? Have you not understood? The Lord is an everlasting God, the creator of all the earth. He never grows weary or faint. And no one can measure the depth of his understanding. He gives power to the weak and strength to the powerless. Even youths will become weak and tired, and young men will fall in exhaustion. But those who trust, those who wait on the Lord, shall find new strength. They shall soar high on wings like eagles. They will run and not be weary, and they will walk and not faint. That word wait there is kava. Q-A-V-A-A, kava. And it means to wait, to look for, to hope or expect, to collect or to bind together, to twist, to bind like a rope or like wicker, to be strong, robust, tying to strength, to bind together, to wrap, to twist. And so in our days, those that wait upon the Lord, those that put their hope and all their trust in a word of the Lord, continually lift up that word to the Lord to them. My heart is healed. I'm trusting the Lord. Maybe that's something you're trusting in the Lord for. He will renew your strength, that you can mount up with wings as eagles. A lot of the prophecies that Isaiah got, we are using now today in the fights that we are. Catapults. They had catapult devices that would throw fire across, stones across. And in our next program, I'm running out of time already, but in our next episode, it'll be episode 14 of the 15 episodes we're going to have on this. We are going to continue with Hezekiah because there's much to learn from this king. Amen. And I trust that you're going to be well in everything you put your hands to, that you will prosper. Ken and I speak our love to you and our thanks for you for being with us. God bless you. Bye-bye.